Hello and welcome to the Organic Gardening Podcast. I'm Sarah Brown, and in this special episode I'll be looking at some of the creatures that live within our soil. You may have already heard our previous episode when I discussed with my colleagues Chris and Anton how to get that perfect soil for your plants to thrive. As any organic grower knows, getting your plant roots into good soil will help to feed, get moisture and build up a strong pest-resilient specimen. And this time of year, before you start sowing or growing, is the perfect time to think about that brown stuff beneath our boots. So if you haven't already tuned into our January episode, I urge you to do so. But in this little bonus recording, I wanted to look at two soil creatures in particular. Earthworms, for instance. We all recognise them, and they're an excellent indicator of how good your soil is. But how much do we actually know about them? I also wanted to look at a creature which is hated by many, but seen by few. It's the mole. But before we start, I'd just like to say thank you to our sponsors, Viridian Nutrition. Viridian produce a range of award-winning ethical and organic supplements which include vitamins, minerals, herbal oils and balms. I love the way they call themselves the vitamin company with an organic heart. Their supplements are stocked in over 1,000 specialist health stores across the UK. So to find out more, visit viridiannutrition.com. That's Viridian with a V, nutrition.com. So back to the mole. I admit to a personal fascination of this elusive creature, not least because my lawn shows exactly where he's been. And who best to find out more about a mole's habits and lifestyle than a mole catcher? So I hunted around and found Jeff Nichols, who has spent a lifetime studying and catching these earth-living mammals. And if, like me, your knowledge of mole comes only from reading Wind in the Willows, then listen on. Well, Jeff, tell us about this little creature. And it is a little creature. I think most of us have this in our heads that a mole is quite a large animal, but it's not, is it?
No, it's not. It's all the damage you see in your gardens, your fields, your paddocks is all done by a creature that can sit in the palm of your hand. When you look, it's capable of. It's a Herculean task, and you have to admire them and respect them for what the good creature they are.
And that's their great big front paws, isn't it, that's doing all the earth moving?
Yeah, it is. They're forelimbs. That's where all the power and the movement is. They've got 6 fingers. They have basically an extra finger. It's a small bone that just comes out just prior to the thumb. And it's connected to their thumb by a piece of skin, so it makes it like a spade. So basically, they've got 5 pickaxes and a spade on each side, and they definitely do know how to use them.
Tell me about how they're adapted to live underground.
Oh, this is the remarkable thing about them. They've been around for millions of years. Nature doesn't get it wrong. She's provided them with everything they need to survive in such an environment. They live in what we call a hypercapnic environment. We'll have a low level of oxygen and a high level of carbon dioxide. So they change the atmosphere in their tunnels themselves. Or they produce a bicarbonate in their body, which basically is like a buffer. I don't want to go into too technical, but it enables them to control the levels of carbon dioxide in their body, and they pass it in their urine as carbonic acid, and that helps to buffer the carbon dioxide build-up in the tunnels as well.
Wow. And the fact that they're in the dark all the time, is it true that they are blind?
Oh, no, sadly not. I film moles in the ground, and they have what we call scotopic vision or dim light vision, and they're not blind. They can see perfectly well in their own environments. They don't like the light. It's because of their eyes. Their eyes are 1 millimeter across, but they have a lot more rods than cones in their eyes, which enables them to see in dim light conditions.
And they have other means of sensing how they move and where they move.
Yes, they have a thing, it's called a kinesthetic sense. Basically, it's an imprinted pattern of memory. Because they are living in a permanently dark world, they use memory they know the length of the tunnel, they know every turn in the tunnel and every junction in the tunnel. And most of the time, the moles have actually constructed these tunnels. If they haven't constructed those tunnels, they have an imprinted pattern of memory. So when they pass through another territory, they know the tunnels, they learn it. And they use another thing called proprioception, which is the body's ability to understand movement and awareness of space. If you was to walk into a darkened room and you reach out, you just touch the light switch. It's because you remember where the light switch is. What the brain does, it says, I need the light switching on. Please repeat the signals that I've previously given you to put the light on. And that's the basic way of understanding how the mole finds its way around its environment.
Oh, that's very interesting. So if I see a sequence of molehills going across my lawn, is that one mole or is that a family of moles that are creating them?
It's normally one mole. The moles don't like each other. They live solitary lives. And what happens is late February, March, the moles will go through a chemical change. The male mole will fill with testosterone and he'll leave his territory and he will go off in search of a female. This is when gardeners can get a row of molehills going across their lawn, through their allotment, across the paddocks in a straight line, what we used to call them the tunnels of love. Every single mole territory, everywhere in the United Kingdom, must link by a tunnel. If it didn't, they wouldn't exist as a species, because I'm going to break another myth here, and moles can't fly. I'm afraid that is a myth that I can break now. Moles cannot fly. They tunnel everywhere. They tunnel to find their food, and they tunnel to find their mates.
So it's like we have a road system overground. They have a tunnel system underground.
Exactly. And again, the mole is dictated by one thing. It's just food. He needs to find 2/3 of its own body weight in food every day.
So
it has to, every single day. It's got a huge calorific burn.
And what do they eat, Jeff?
Well, they used to be called insectivores, as the name would suggest. They are insects, but that's been changed. I've got to say this right now, ulipotifleurs. And they feed on all sorts of bugs and grubs that they can find. But obviously, as everyone will understand, that their favourite food is the good old earthworm.
Who's also tunnelling in the earth.
Yes.
Do you know how they find the worms? Is it by smell or by touch?
Oh, no, it's by vibration sense. On their face and their rear feet and their tail, they've got special hairs called vibrissae. They're very stiff hairs, and they detect vibrations. So the mole feels the vibrations of things moving in its environment. A mole cannot afford to dig for no reason. So it won't just come tunneling across your garden and through your vegetable plot unless there's something there as a reward, and that reward has to be food.
So when I see a sequence of molehills, this is the mole seeking new territory, is that right?
Again, it depends on the time of the year. If it's the springtime, single male mole looking for a female, tunnels of love. If you suddenly get a rush of molehills in different areas, now the mole is dictated by his need for food. Moles don't just have one kitchen, they have various kitchens which they go to as and when the soil and the weather is dictating to them. So if the ground is dry, they'll go to a damper area where they'll find their food. So a mole can have 2, 3, 4, 5 kitchens, depending on the carrying capacity of the habitat where he's chosen to live. And the mole's ability to dig in good soil, 18 feet an hour, 100 foot a day, and the ability to move at 2.5 miles an hour through the tunnels, it doesn't take him long to get from one kitchen to another. So those molehills are just the waste that he can't compact. He has to put it somewhere. We dig a hole, we put the soil somewhere, we have to put it on the top, the same as he does.
I was looking online for mole repellers, and the best thing seemed to me was something that vibrates. It's a stick that you put in the ground and it causes vibrations. Do you think those actually work?
Vibrations to a mole means two things. It either means a predator or food. They have very few predators. Their main predator is us. So if the vibrations continue and no predator comes, then it's obviously the opposite is food. So creating vibrations is telling the mole that there's food there. They in fact encourage the mole to come to the area.
Okay, so presumably you would have to use them in conjunction with a trap then if you wanted to catch them all.
No, I don't like the word trap, to be truthful. I prefer device, because when people think of the word trap, they think it's to deceive and ensnare. It's not nice. We're trying to remove the mole, and as a mole catcher, I catch the moles, and then that is in the device that restrains them. You can't use something that's going to encourage the mole to the area and then put a device in to catch it. It's a difficult one, because people say, oh, if you can attract them, surely you can repel them. It's not quite that simple. You have to find the right tunnel to place any device, and that location is different wherever you go. You have to understand how the mole is feeling that environment. You have to put together the overall picture before you even consider controlling the mole. Okay,
so this is a skill, and you've got a lifetime of this skill behind you, I understand.
That is a misspent youth.
Watching moles or hunting for moles?
Watching moles and hunting the moles is, yes, that's the easiest way to put it. When I was young, I had a choice. I could pick potatoes or I could catch moles. I was very fortunate, because I was told if you want to catch a mole, there's some up in the graveyard. You can go and catch them up there, and we'll give you 4 shillings for the mole. And I was sort of sent out with a bent stick and a piece of string, and told to catch the moles in the old way. I was never allowed to have any metal devices, because they said, well, you might hurt yourself, and you're not going to catch one anyway. I think it's like a rag to a bull, really. So I sat in the graveyard, and I learned from my mistakes. And that's the finest way to learn when you're dealing with nature, is learn by your mistakes. Take the time to study them, understand their world, and you can't go far wrong.
So from what I've heard, Jeff, I'm loving these moles that are living underground. Apart from the unsightly mounds, the mole is actually not doing any damage to your growing area at all, is he really?
No, he's just a nuisance. Moles do share their tunnels. They share their tunnels with mice and voles. These are the creatures that eat the roots of your plants and your vegetables. It's not the mole. The mole does not eat them. That's the rodents that share the tunnels with him. He's not a pest. He's a nuisance. If he didn't throw up the soil, then we wouldn't know he was there. It's that simple.
Also, from a gardener's point of view, that soil is actually very handy. Now, I've scooped it up and used it as really nicely sifted loam, which I then use as a base for a potting mix to sow my seeds into. So actually, the mole's doing me a favour.
The molehills, it's not a child's book of join the dots up either. It bears no relation to what's going on underneath the ground. The volume of soil that you see on the surface can dictate the depth that the mole is working at.
So the bigger the molehill, the deeper the tunnel.
Yes, exactly.
So tell me, how do you deal with them humanely?
Okay, humanely is the real word. You must respect this little creature. If you place something in the ground to catch the mole alive, you are responsible for the welfare of that animal. I would never, ever take a mole unnecessarily. They are a wonderful creature. They're an amazing creature. I have this saying that I always say to people, below the ground, no one hears them scream. And if we was to hear them scream, then we wouldn't control them. I would always say to people, if you got a mole in your garden, to think twice before you actually make the call or go to the shop, because quite often the mole that you've got is not staying. You have to understand its reasons for being there. And is there something that you can do to change that reason for it being there? So sometimes you can just stand back and just look and watch and understand this amazing little creature.
And it's part of the bigger picture, isn't it, that our garden should be full of life, different animals, birds, insects, whatever. It seems very unfair that the mole gets penalised.
He doesn't mean it's harm. He doesn't cause us any health risks, doesn't spread any diseases or things to us. It's just the fact that he's a nuisance and just decides to throw up a bit of soil. And from a gardener's point of view, that is, as we said, a fantastic product to put on other parts of the garden.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate that.
That's okay.
And now I'm continuing my tour underground by looking at earthworms. I'm joined by Anthony Roach, who is joining us from the Earthworm Society of Britain. Hello, Anthony.
Hello, Sarah.
When I come across worms in my own soil, I've noticed that sometimes there's small curly ones, and sometimes there are large, longer ones. That's very untechnical. I'm guessing that you can tell me those are different varieties.
That's right. You will find a number of varieties of earthworms in your garden. Broadly, we group them based on where they are in the soil. So your small curly ones could be one of two types of earthworm. One of these are called epigeics. These are called surface-feeding earthworms. So these live and feed within the leaf litter. So you often find them on the surface under things like plant pots. And then you've got another type, which are called endogeic. So these occur within the sort of top, I'd say 30 centimetres of the soil.
Are those the large, longer ones?
No, those are not the large, longer ones. So the largest and the longest of the earthworms, we call those the deep burrowers or deep living earthworms. And the scientific name is anisic earthworms. Okay, so these are the largest. Lumbricus terrestris is one of the most well-known of those. They feed on decaying organic matter, but leaf litter as well. And they come up at night to feed on leaves, and they drag them into these long vertical burrows. They're the ones that make the casts on the surface as well. So people who run golf courses or bowling greens perhaps aren't huge fans of these guys, but they're very important because they turn that leaf litter into tiny fragments which go back into the soil, and that allows those nutrients to be taken up by, other organisms in the soil.
You could say that have a dual role really for the gardener, couldn't you? One is that they're helping break up the soil. They're creating tunnels and air spaces which allow air and moisture to move through.
And they can take stale air from below and they bring fresh air above through this burrowing action down into their burrows.
but also they're breaking down the compost and the leaf litter to make it accessible to the microbes and ultimately to the plants.
Exactly. Often these casts are 5 times richer in nitrogen and 7 times richer in phosphates that are needed by plants. Yeah.
So we should be picking up the worm casts.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. They're very valuable to the soil itself.
This ties in so beautifully with my conversation before about moles who were considered as pests, but in fact, similar sort of thing. They're aerating the soil beneath, but they're also indicators that there is a good, rich soil life, because a mole can't live without eating the worms, the beetles, or whatever. And it's the same with the worms, isn't it? They're indicators that you've got a really healthy soil.
And the key, I think, certainly for a lot of earthworms, is plenty of organic matter. So if you're improving the soil with compost or with manure, that certainly does help to maintain the earthworms that you've got.
And if I haven't got worms in my soil, how do I bring them in?
Okay, so certainly at the Society, this is a common question that we get. I would ask the question, why is it you don't have earthworms? Okay, is there something around your soil? Is the soil degraded? What is the pH of the soil? Is it very exposed? Is it compacted? Is it sandy? Because if it's sandy with low organic material, that is a soil that, earthworms don't really like. And in terms of bringing earthworms in, if you're bringing in anisic, so these deep burrowers, they're not absolutely, because they are going to aerate the soil for you, but it's important that they are local. They're not from abroad. Okay, so go to a worm farm that's near you if you want to buy earthworms. But that being said, there's no guarantee that they will stay where they are. And actually, Lumbricus terrestris, apparently, it can potentially move at least up to 20 meters in a single night. So,
wow.
But you do need to provide that organic material. You can order earthworms online. They may not come from this country. They may come from abroad, and it's very important that they are species that are native to the UK. Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds a bit of a risky business. What I'm thinking of is someone who's created a garden, maybe created some raised beds, got specific areas in which they want to grow their flowers and their vegetables. The chances are, especially if it's a new built house with very poor soil, that they're not going to have earthworms there. So you think it's okay to go online and to buy some, so long as you check that there are British earthworms?
I think an alternative to this would be developing a compost heap and organic material, because earthworms will be attracted to areas with high organic material and where there are compost heaps, particularly species like Azenia fetida and Dendrobina veneta will find your compost bins. However, obviously, if you're wanting borders and beds, that's different. I think what I would say is I think you need to think really carefully about the overall habitat and not just focusing on earthworms, but creating a space that is attractive to as many soil organisms and insects as possible, because that diversity will help to increase the quality of the soil that you've got.
These are all things that are very dear to an organic gardener's heart, definitely, and it's something that Chris and I often say in our podcasts. How does rain affect worms?
There's been a lot of discussion over the years about rain and the impact on earthworms, and why is it that the earthworms come up to the surface during a rainstorm. And there are a number of competing ideas about this. Some believe that the idea is that it mimics the vibrations of moles digging through the soil. So in order to avoid being eaten on hearing these vibrations, they come to the surface. Key to earthworms, as you know, is that they breathe through their skin and they need moist conditions in order to survive. So they can dry out, and actually rainwater allows earthworms to move and disperse, and that enables them to colonize new areas.
If you touch a worm, it's moist and it's to feel, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Help me understand the actual process, almost the anatomy of the worm. It eats at one end, it will be eating the organic matter that you mentioned, the compost and the leaf mold and whatever. And then it passes through the worm, does it, and gets excreted at the tail end?
Yes, but the key thing to know is that they have microbes in their guts, and that means that relationship with those enzymes actually chemically changes the soil material or the leaf litter material that comes out the other end. So through that process, they essentially are creating, new soil.
Let's get back to some of the myths. It's not true that you can cut the end off a worm and it'll grow again, is it?
So it's interesting because when I used to get this question, I used to say, absolutely not. If you cut a worm in half, it's a dead worm.
Yeah.
However, having said that, it depends on where you cut the worm, and it depends on the actual earthworm as well. So Dave Coulson, in his book, he's aware of a scientist called G.E. Gates, and he spent about 40 years of his life studying earthworms, in particular doing these awful experiments where he was dismembering worms. And actually, based on his research, we now know that the Lumbricus terrestris will grow back its head, but apparently not its tail.
That's the big
earthworm, the common lobworm. Yeah, that's right. So in the case of the brandling worm, okay, it can potentially regenerate both parts. So if you cut it between segments 20 and 24 from the head ends, it will regenerate both ends. So
this is so precise. These are the little red striped worms that you find in
That's right, yeah. But it's new to me that Lumbricus terrestris can regrow its head.
I'm inclined to think, just to be safe rather than sorry, I wouldn't go around cutting up earthworms. So Anthony, part of your work is to encourage us gardeners to understand more about earthworms. And the Earthworm Society itself has set up a national earthworm recording scheme, which you'd like us to get involved in. Tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so the National Earthworm Recording Scheme is something that we set up because we recognised that earthworms were under-recorded nationally. And so the aim of it is to collate as many earthworm records across the British Isles as possible and undertake sampling of areas for earthworms. Once we have a better understanding of what earthworms are where, then we understand their habitat preferences, it's much easier then to conserve species.
If our listeners want to join this recording scheme, then the best thing to do is to look at the Earthworm Society of Britain website and they'll find out information there.
Yeah, that's right.
Sounds fantastic. Anthony, thank you so much. I feel I've learned a lot more about earthworms, not least the difference between the small curly ones and the large longer ones. Thank you so much for spending time talking about it.
Oh, that's okay. You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me today.
Next month, Chris gets a brush with royalty as he meets Debs Goodenough, gardener to the Prince of Wales and committed organic grower. In the meantime, why not tag us into your gardening updates on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram? And if you have any questions for the podcast postbag, do get in touch. It's quite simple, @GardenOrganicUK, or an old-fashioned email on podcast@gardenorganic.org.uk. Until then, thanks for listening and bye for now.